Um, Evening times are difficult for people. I really feel bad that we don't have many people to attend, but still, I'm sure we will benefit.
Yeah.
Dr. Arjunan is here, Dr. Chandra is here, I am here, he is here, Sanan is here. So hopefully we will benefit. I met Dr. Rajkumar in World History Association conferences. A number of them we attended together. And of course we exchange our views there. And then of course our affinities, we are next door to each other. I was born in what is Bangladesh now. At that time it was East Pakistan. And he is from West Bengal. And he is teaching at Vidyasagar University. Yeah,
Some 125 kilometers.
from there. I don't remember the geography of the area much.
Yeah.
Well, I have been to Calcutta, but not to the adjacent areas. So, and he was kind enough to inform us that he will be visiting care and give talks. So we took the advantage of that. And out of the, I think, 4 or 5 topics, Dr. Chandra thought that recent trends in Indian foreign policy were the topic for us. So without taking any more time.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hassan. Thank you, Honorable President. Thank you, Coordinator. Thanks, the distinguished members. I am in fact immensely pleased to be here. This is my first visit to Kuala Lumpur. And of course, this is a family visit, but still I tried to combine because I take keen interest in my academics and research activities, as Professor Hassan informed you. That couple of occasions we have met outside in United States and London and other places. The broad area of my research and activities is international relations, and as far as my specific research area, I am focusing on South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. Currently I am working on a research project on strategic interest in India's strategic interest in Central Asia, and we take very keen interest in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, because of our government's policy, because of our geographical proximity, so on and so forth. So taking all these points into consideration, I thought it would be appropriate on my part not only to share my views on India's foreign policy, but at the same time to get some feedback from all of you that how people in this part of the world, all of you, think about India. What is your perception? How in the long run we can jointly promote bilateral relations, we can strengthen bilateral relations with this part. Because only India's perception is not enough when we think of foreign policy, when we think of bilateral relations and so on and so forth. So other side viewpoint is also equally important as far as research is concerned. So when we talk of recent trends in India's foreign policy, broadly the framework which I have prepared is like this, that it has 4 segments, my presentation. Number 1 is goals and objectives of India's foreign policy. Number 2 is transition in India's foreign policy strategy. Number 3, foreign policy dynamics, and in this section I will be exclusively focusing on the challenges before India today, and finally my findings and concluding remarks. And if time permits, I will be happy to focus 3-4 minutes on India's perception towards Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and special reference to Malaysia. Then foreign policy objectives and goals, if you look at that broadly, each and every country, particularly a big country like India, the foreign policy framework we can divide into, foreign policy objectives can be classified into three categories, short range objectives, middle range objectives, and then long range, long term objectives. Short range objectives are something, in order to fulfill your immediate needs. Okay, so you need to formulate certain policies. Middle range objectives, something, say for example, it takes from 5 to 10 years time that you frame certain policies that India's relations with ASEAN in next 10 years. We'd like to promote our volume of trade, our strategic interests, so on and so forth, like that. So middle range objective is something, it requires extensive planning. And then the third part is that is the long range objective. Long range objective is, you cannot specify the time frame because it may take 20 years, it may take 30 years or 50 years. It's a sort of dream like Soviet Union had, that it wished to convert the whole world into a communist society. Okay, that's all. So we, from India's perspective, our broad range or long range objective is to convert India into a developed nation. Say, our former president had a vision that by 2020 we must develop ourselves to that level. So, taking into account these factors, the short range, middle range and long range objectives, we have been trying to promote our national interest, because each and every country across the globe, irrespective of its nature of political systems, irrespective of its geography, irrespective of its standard economy and so on and so forth, every country across the globe promotes its foreign policy in order to protect its national interest. So obviously India is no exception to that. Now the interesting part about India's foreign policy is that in recent years, last say 2.5 decades or so on, there has been extensive debate on India's foreign policy. Okay, till 1990, as long as there was the Cold War period from 1945 to 1990, hardly there was any scope and opportunity for the debates on India's foreign policy because of different reasons, which if time permits I will try to clarify. But the point is, in recent couple of decades, extensive debates are going on India's foreign policy. First is obviously India's economic and military rise, because we feel that the way India has been rising economically as well as militarily, India has the capacity to shift the global balance of power. This is my first submission. Submission 2 is the lens through which India traditionally viewed the world is no more valid because of India's growing stature. You know that India was one of the founding members of the non-alignment movement, and in Southeast Asia also some countries they were actively associated with non-aligned movement and so on. Now that non-aligned movement, non-alignment movement is no longer we consider very viable and relevant, keeping in mind the global scenario, particularly after the demise of the former Soviet Union in 1990. Then the third point I'd like to focus is that the post-Cold War years lacked consensus on a single strategic framework, because from 1947 to 1990 broadly there was a consensus about India's foreign policy perceptions, India's foreign policy strategy, mainly or precisely because of the fact that Indian National Congress, they dominated the political system. So one party domination was there by and large from 1947 to 1990, barring some exceptions and couple of years. So therefore at that point of time hardly there was any scope and options. And secondly, all other political parties apart from the Congress party, they also supported the Indian National Congress as far as foreign policy perception was concerned. So hardly there was any debates and discussions on that point. But in the post-Cold War years, what happened is because of the rise of coalition governments at the center, then the rise of at present this Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, then the rise of other various political parties, the left parties, they started playing very important role in the Indian political system, as a result of which hardly there was any unanimity among the policymakers, among the political parties regarding the foreign policy strategy and so on. Another important point is that Barack Obama visited India sometime in the year 2009, and he delivered a speech in the Indian Parliament where he spoke that he recognized the very fact that India is rising, and at the same time he reminded the Indians that power comes with responsibility. So what he meant is very obvious, that because India is rising economically, so it is now time for India to shoulder some global responsibilities at the same time. Because till 1990, hardly we got any opportunity to take part or to contribute in the major developments or major issues in global politics. Okay. Now India is now invited at the G8 summit also, group of 8 countries summit, and India today is called on the negotiating table for discussions on nuclear proliferation, then global warming, then Middle East crisis, many other humanitarian issues across the globe. So considering all these, I feel that a time has come that we must focus extensively on India's foreign policy debates, how it should evolve in future, how best we can promote India's national interest in the coming years and coming decades. And one more, one important aspect of my presentation is that India is today no longer considered only as a South Asian power. We consider ourselves as a very important power or player in Asia and across the globe. So this is another important reason that why I thought that we should focus extensively on our foreign policy debates. The second part of my presentation is foreign policy strategies post-Cold War transition. What kind of transition has taken place, under what context these changes have taken place. I am very brief. The first is, already I shared with you, the transition from consensus on building a socialist society to building a modern capitalist society. Because Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, he had a vision of socialist society India should promote. At that time, by and large, the Indian policymakers, the other political parties, they also supported this socialist pattern of society, this vision. But once, after the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991, things started changing, things started moving in a different direction. That is, in early 90s, India underwent a major crisis, late 80s, early 90s economic crisis, and to meet these economic challenges and crises, India extensively focused on economic reforms, and whereby we promoted our privatization of economy, public-private partnership was promoted, and under the Prime Ministership, that time Prime Minister was P.V. Narasimha Rao, and Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, he introduced radical economic reforms so that public-private partnership, privatization of industries, and all these things can be promoted. So as a result of this, what happened is that since 1990 onwards, that our focus shifted slightly from politics to economics. Okay. Till 1990, because of our association with non-aligned movement, we focused extensively on political issues across the globe. And since 1990, our focus shifted from politics to economics, though it did not last longer because at present we are trying to balance between politics and economics both. Then the third is that fundamental shift in India's stand from being a leader of the third world to the recognition of the potential that India could emerge as a global power. Because of our association with the non-alignment movement, that time India was very much considered as a very third world power. Okay, and we wanted to get out of this particular syndrome, that we did not like to be projected as a third world power merely, but rather we would like to be more associated, like to be recognized as a global power because of our ambition and aims and objectives, which is backed by our geography, backed by our economy, resources, military capacity, so on and so forth. Then the fourth point is that there was a major fundamental shift, that is India discarded anti-Western political impulses and became committed to Western political values. Because of non-alignment movement, because of our closer association with the former Soviet Union, India kept itself away from the Western world. Okay, for a long time. And this is a big blunder, I feel, that India's foreign policy perspective, this was not the right kind of policy India formulated. Anyway, but since 1990s onwards, we have been focusing on promoting our bilateral relations, multilateral relations with Western countries and Western various important institutions across the globe, which is funded, dominated by the Western societies, Western countries. So this was indeed a major shift in India's foreign policy since 1990s. Then there was transition from idealism to realism. This is a very important point. Because of our association with the non-alignment movement, extensively we had focused on idealist kind of foreign policy. Our design, the foreign policy, was based on idealism. Though one might contest my view on the ground that during the tenure of Mrs. Indira Gandhi and thereafter, obviously, we focused on realism. But my submission is from 1947 to strictly, particularly during the tenure of Jawaharlal Nehru, our foreign policy framework was premised mainly on the idealism was the basis. And then gradually we started coming out of that idealist framework and started moving towards realism. Because during the tenure of Mrs. Gandhi, one very important development that took place, that is in 1974, India experimented the nuclear test. So that was the beginning of a shift from idealism to realism. And 1990s and thereafter, this period extensively we have been focusing on realistic pattern of foreign policy, because India, despite the fact that we are not a recognized nuclear weapon state according to NPT status, according to NPT guidelines, but all over the world it is now a known fact that India is a nuclear weapon state. So that is why I feel that there has been a fundamental transformation in India's foreign policy from idealism to realism. So the next is again a very recent addition, hardly 10 decades old, that soft power diplomacy has been very prominent. We have started focusing on soft power diplomacy. Now, soft power diplomacy, soft power is basically a concept introduced by Joseph Nye, and where we try to focus not on military capacity, not on the defense and military build-up or nuclear weapons, but soft power is something very different, according to Joseph Nye, that cultural values. We try to export our culture. We try to take part extensively in infrastructure building, in extensive humanitarian activities. We try to take part in building hospitals, roads, like we actively engaged India at present in Afghanistan, in some parts of Central Asia, like that. So in 2006, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they specifically came out with this strategy that there has to be a separate division under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whereby the soft power policy we wanted to promote. And as part of this soft power diplomacy across the globe, there are many countries. Malaysia is also one of them, where our center is there. I'll come to the later part of my discussion. So what I mean to say is that apart from our hard power diplomacy and hard power politics, we have been trying to focus on soft power diplomacy, because there is a feeling in India that mere hard power cannot promote your national interest truly. So there has to be focus, because soft power diplomacy is something that on humanitarian grounds you are standing by other countries during the crisis period or other occasions in order to get their support, in order to assert your influence other way over the other countries. Okay. So this is another important factor which I feel, but again at the end of my presentation I would like to submit the fact that soft power diplomacy mere cannot produce very good results. So there has to be a balance, there has to be, the focus should be mostly on rather smart power diplomacy. Okay, so smart power diplomacy is nothing but the combination of soft power and hard power, and these two things, which we have been now trying to promote. And then finally, India's Look-East policy or Act-East policy. Earlier it was considered, it was named as Look-East policy since 1990s. Look-East policy means India, as I told earlier, that mostly confined itself with the third world societies, and as part of non-aligned movement, so on and so forth. India's perception, India's orientation was something different. And now, once we introduced this Look-East policy, we wanted to promote bilateral relations with each and every Southeast Asian countries. And under the present central government led by Narendra Modi, this Look-East policy has been converted into Act-East policy. Okay. So Act-East policy is just extension of Look-East policy. It is not fundamental shift. It is extension of the existing policy which was already there. So Act-East policy means time has come for India to act. Look-East policy means we wanted to promote our bilateral relations. We wanted to go for closer engagement with the Southeast Asian nations. And Act-East policy means already we have reached up to that stage, and now is the time to move forward. Then another part of is that how far it is feasible that the aims or objectives of our foreign policy, that global power, we are aspiring to be a global power, we are aspiring to be a very important power as far as global politics is concerned. There are several kind of important challenges India is facing at the moment. So in order to be a really global, in order to reach up to that level, India must face these challenges and India must find some alternative strategies so that it can face these challenges and as well as it can come out as a major important player out of these facing these challenges. Now there are several challenges, couple of them I would like to share with you. That at the moment India has been busy in addressing two most important sources of insecurity. Number one is unresolved territorial dispute with China, and second is unresolved territorial dispute with Pakistan. Now, very important the point is that some of the distinguished foreign policy researcher like Kanti Bajpai and others, Harshdeep and Kanti Bajpai, they suggest the fact that somehow India's rise as a global power has been restrained, has been restricted because we are too much involved, engrossed with our boundary disputes with China as well as Pakistan. So Kanti Bajpai suggests that if really India wants to be a global power in the coming decades, in the coming years, then immediately our foremost objective should be to resolve our territorial or boundary disputes with China as well as Pakistan. But I don't foresee that in the next couple of years or next 1 decade's time we are going to resolve our territorial dispute, because the way things are moving, China does not take much interest in resolving boundary disputes with India, despite the fact that it had boundary disputes with all the neighboring countries surrounding China, and it has resolved that. It's a very interesting point. But with India, it is not interested in resolving the boundary dispute. So that is one point. And secondly, Pakistan also the situation is same, because Kashmir, we in India, we consider Kashmir as an integral part of India, and Pakistan on its part, it claims that Kashmir is an integral part of Pakistan. So there is this long dispute going on since 1948 till date, which remains unresolved. So Kanti Bajpai, Harshdeep and couple of other scholars, foreign policy scholars in India also, we feel that we are too much engrossed with these problems. We are too much involved in these problems, and as a result of which we are not able to divert our attention towards the direction which we are supposed to be. Then the next factor is India's unilateralism in South Asia is being replaced by multilateral approach. This is another important development, major challenge before India. That in South Asia we are no longer considered as an unchallenged power. China, through Pakistan, is trying to get involved more and more into South Asian affairs. Already China has signed bilateral agreements with Bangladesh. China has signed bilateral agreements with Pakistan, Sri Lanka. Now it's on the way to signing these agreements with Nepal as well as Bhutan. So as a result of which I feel that in South Asia, the biggest challenge before India today is to encounter the entry of China into this region. The third important challenge is India emerges as an important element of future balance of power in the world. Already I mentioned in the earlier part of my presentation that India emerges as an important element of future balance of power. Now, this is a big challenge, and there is dilemma, there is extensive debates going on within India about this strategy and policy, what should we follow. Because two major power blocks are on the rise. One is that India, Russia, China, there is a talk that these important countries should come together to counter US hegemony, US domination, and at the same time parallel development is India, Japan, and then Australia. Okay, these countries with United States, so there is a parallel, and United States has been extensively pressurizing and focusing on that India should join to this bloc, that India, Japan, Australia with United States. So the challenge before India is which path to follow or whether to avoid both the blocs. That is a big challenge which we are yet to overcome. The next is that preserving strategic autonomy is again the biggest challenge before India. Shashi Tharoor, perhaps you are aware of, familiar with this name. Shashi Tharoor, he says that somehow he feels that because of India's signing of civil nuclear deal with the United States, somehow our strategic autonomy is lost, and this is going to be a major problematic factor for India in the coming years. So he feels that somehow India should devise a certain strategy so that it can preserve its strategic autonomy. Because from 1947 to 1990, militarily we were not that much strong enough, economically also we were very backward, and once we became strong in economic and military fields, why strategic autonomy is being compromised? This is a big question before the scholars. So again a major challenge before India today. This apart, India faces substantial domestic constraints and problems like the rich-poor disparity, okay, and the basic needs and the rich-poor disparity apart, the other factors are very important. That is that infrastructure building, we need to concentrate too much on roads, hospitals and buildings. So these are going to be a major problem because a major section of our society still live on less than $1 per day. Okay, so hardly they have the means to prepare their meals twice a day. So that is another major domestic. So there are several domestic constants. I am not going into detail. Perhaps during question answer I can try to focus on, like the kind of political pluralism, different political parties. We are running a coalition government or most of the time, except this present government. So this is a major challenge. And then energy security is a major challenge before us. In India, consider the population. Okay, 130 crore population, so energy security is not only a major challenge before India, in the coming years this is going to be a very important area for Indian policymakers to promote energy security. Then balancing environment and development. This is another important challenge because the recently held this Paris conference, India took a very important role that somehow we must promote the global environment and sustainable environment and development, and that is why there has to be some balance between preservation of environment and at the same time with the help of advanced technology, latest technology, we should provide adequate safeguards to our industry and technology, so on and so forth. And then fighting international terrorism. This is another important challenge. So this is not a very easy way to handle because India alone cannot fight international terrorism. So therefore we need the support of not only the neighboring countries but also the big powers like United States, like China, so on and so forth. Now coming to the last part of my presentation is that some of the I would like to focus on India's policy towards Southeast Asia, as I said at the very beginning, and early 1990s, that India's Lucas policy we started focusing on, that bilateral and multilateral engagement with Southeast Asian nations we started focusing. Then under the tenure of Modi government, as already I said, that extensive focus is on Act East policy, Then secondly, India and ASEAN have upgraded their ties to a strategic partnership. Our ties with the ASEAN members, ASEAN Association is now on the way towards promoting a strategic partnership. This is, I consider, a very good development. Then India's trade with Southeast Asian nations expanded more than tenfold. This is a very interesting figure I have got. That is US dollar 7.1 billion. It was in 2001. And at present, during 2013-14, this figure has gone up to 74.4 billion US dollars. It's a very interesting development because despite the fact that we were very close to Soviet Union and after Soviet demise with Russia, the trade, volume of trade is very low, 10 billion, 12 billion, 10 to 12 billion US dollar. So from this point of view, Southeast Asia is indeed a major focus.
Sorry, can you please repeat those figures?
This is 74.4 billion during
From
2013-14.
7 to 74.
Huh?
From 7 billion to 74 billion.
Yes, from 7 billion in 2001
2001,
to 74 billion.
US dollars 70 billion.
Yeah,
74.
74 billion.
That was
74.
2001, what was it?
2001 is a 7.
7 billion, okay?
Yes,
And 2014,
yes, 74.
dollar 74.
Yeah, so tenfold rise in India's volume of trade with Southeast Asian nations. And India has been negotiating with this regional comprehensive economic partnership that includes the ASEAN countries, then Australia, China, Japan, Korea and New Zealand. And this regional comprehensive economic partnership, it accounts for more than 1/3 of the global GDP. If it really works out, it is going to be a major boost not only for India but also for these ASEAN countries as well as the rest of the countries who are going to be a party to this partnership program. Then India's engagement with ASEAN countries is not, however, uniform because it is more prominent. India's engagement is more prominent with Singapore and Malaysia compared to rest of the ASEAN countries. In the coming years, we'd like to see that India's bilateral engagement with the rest of the Southeast Asian countries also go up. We have two comprehensive economic cooperation agreements with Singapore and Malaysia that covers trade in goods and services and also investments. And why I am very keen to focus on Southeast Asia from India's foreign policy perspective, simply because of the fact that connectivity by road and sea between India and Southeast Asia is very important because of our geographical proximity and certain other factors. But so far in this field the progress is very minimal. And just 1 minute I'll be focusing on India and Malaysia. Bilateral trade in 2014 between India and Malaysia has gone up to 13.84 billion US dollar, which I consider a pretty good amount. But at the same time, I am apprehensive about one fact, that there is huge imbalance in the trade. The balance of trade imbalance is in favor of Malaysia. Okay, so this gap we need to bridge in the coming years. Then India Cultural Center in Kuala Lumpur, as part of our soft power diplomacy, which I mentioned earlier, was set up in the year 2010. It conducts various classes on dance, yoga, then Hindi language promotion, then tabla, etc. This is very important. Then India and Malaysia have signed memorandum of understanding on cooperation in the fields of traditional medicines. This is again a very interesting, and this agreement was signed in October 2010. Then Malaysia has one of the largest communities of persons of India's origin in the world. So this Indian diaspora can be of very good help as far as promoting bilateral relations between India and Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia, is concerned. Coming to the final concluding remarks, final part of my presentation. What I'd like to say is that we are proud of our democratic values, democratic system, but at the same time, some scholars, they consider that because of our democracy, it's called noisy democracy. Okay, so obviously, so India cannot build domestic political support to foreign policy initiatives purely on the argument of power because of noisy democracy, because you see these days, because of various political parties, they disruptive tendencies is more in the Indian parliament than constructive engagement. So this is a very important point from India's foreign policy perspective. The next is India has failed to develop a strategic agenda in commensurate with its growing economic and military capabilities. Again, throughout history, India has failed to master the creation, development and use of military instruments in support of its national objectives. Many scholars, particularly Harshvi Band, he keeps focusing on, he kept on suggesting the fact that we have tremendous potential, immense capabilities, but we have not been able to channelize our potentialities into the right direction. Time has come for us to channelize them in the right direction. Already I mentioned that soft power diplomacy has been successful, but it is not enough. So smart power diplomacy is the right answer as far as the present context of India's foreign policy is concerned. And finally, India government, the present government led by Narendra Modi, will have to make a fine balance between its soft power and hard power approach in order to maximize India's national interests. Because hard power extensively we have focused, we are a nuclear weapon state, already I mentioned, but despite the fact that militarily we are strong, economically we are on the rise, but we are not able to resolve our disputes with neighboring countries like China, neighboring countries like Pakistan. Rather, as far as India's relations with the neighboring countries is concerned, it's in a total mess. There is not a single country with whom India is having or able to maintain a very close, cordial, peaceful bilateral relations. You see all the neighboring countries, and China has taken advantage of this mismanagement of India's foreign policy. Okay, so finally I would like to say that the present government has been trying its best to focus, to channelize our potentialities in the right direction, on the basis of our hard power capability as well as soft power capability, and in the coming years we would like to see that India becomes a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and which China has been the main bottleneck for India becoming a permanent member. So I feel that in order to be a global power, India must become the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's a wide topic,
Yes.
and you have covered so many areas. And I thought that we'll continue until 10 o'clock. So we have about 40 minutes. We have international relations expert, political scientist.
Yes.
So I will open the floor for comments, questions.
Along with questions, my suggestion would be that from Malaysian perspective, how you look at the India's foreign policy perceptions and all critically. That will be of immense help to my research also.
Okay, basically, my name is Charles Correa. I'm an independent, I'm a member of Justice.
And you're a journalist, isn't it? Journalist, isn't it?
Well, I'm not I was a journalist. Okay, I mean, I'm many things, but right now I wouldn't say I would describe myself as a journalist.
Anyway.
Practically journalist.
From think tank.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm more interested in this. Anyway, bottom line is this. I mean, people are saying that in Modi, under Narendra, what will you describe Narendra as Modi? Are you favorable towards neoliberal economic policy? Because that seems to be what you are saying. And is Modi actually a neoliberal, or is he more of a kind of like an Indian nationalist? Something like, what you might say, like Juan Perón or Charles de Gaulle, or maybe of India, rather than all, because something like that. And also, I mean, because and also by associating with the West too much. I mean, because the Indian now see, I mean, Modi seems to be not too good. And also, what is Modi doing? Yes, you're doing all these economic development, all these developing cities and all that, but what about taking care of the poor? Because you could end up with a very big dip. I mean, you did mention initiatives to take care of the poor. What had, under Modi, under the present government, what is being done to try and help eliminate rural poverty, to spread development to the rural areas, to take people out of situations, to bring more? I mean, because even in China, there's a growing divide between the rich and the poor, after China embraced capitalist policies. So what is your position on that? I mean, would you describe yourself as a neoliberal, or what would you politically, politically or economically, or what would you describe? I mean, your position you are coming from.
See, it's a very interesting point you have raised. As far as India's economic policy is concerned, from 1947 till 1990, very much nationalist sort of policy we have framed. But it did not pay us. It did not produce the kind of result we were expecting and anticipating. Okay. And precisely this was the reason that why India underwent massive economic reforms in the early 90s. And we have been carrying on with this economic reforms program since last 2.5 decades. So obviously, without much debate, we can say that we have been focusing on neoliberal policy. At the same time, I have mentioned in my presentation that immense challenges before India from domestic as well as international corners. So, as far as rich-poor disparity is concerned, I am not very optimistic. I am not very advocate of Narendra Modi that he is doing fine, very great job, nothing like that. But some of the programs initiated by the present government, I would like to mention that Pradhan Mantri Sadak Yojana, Gram Yojana. Under this program, they have planned to reach electricity by 2020 across the country, all villages. This is one interesting. Secondly, this cooking gas. Narendra Modi's government has taken a massive program so that each and every household gets gas connection in shortest time frame, 3 to 4 years time from now. So again, as I said, that I am not much optimistic about the policies introduced by the present NDA government, keeping in mind the fact that 130 crores population, rich-poor disparity is very high. There are numerous challenges.
Sorry, what is the first policy you mentioned? You mentioned cooking gas supply. What is the other policy you mentioned?
Electricity. Okay. And then insurance policy has been introduced by the government to support the poor people. Okay.
What kind of insurance is it?
Insurance means health insurance and all. You pay a very meager amount to the insurance company, and in the long run you get some health benefits, health insurance benefits and so on. So again, these are at the elementary stage, but very recently the government has started. So considering the fact that 130 crores population, this is going to be a gigantic task, not only for Narendra Modi government, but anybody else, XYZ, whoever comes to power. The point I am harping on is the fact that till this present government came to power, there was no focus or very minimal focus on this bridging the gap, rich-poor disparity, rural development, rural management, health planning, cooking gas, etc., etc. The present government has been at least started saying on this, that our focus is to take care of these problems. Okay.
Well, this is the other thing, because why is it? Because I got a friend, an Indian friend, a
Yes.
Malaysian Indian friend, who of course brings up some stuff that I don't quite agree with. But he claims that this party, the Congress party, even though they adopted a social democratic policy, were members of the Socialist International, they were actually, he says that they are what he call Fabians. They follow Fabian, that they live there. No, but in his mind, I don't know where he got this idea. Maybe he read too much conspiracy theories or all that rubbish on the internet, that Fabians are somehow inherently evil, or they have some conspiracy with this. But I won't go into that. But the question is, yes, there are a lot of people who can tag follow socialism, but what about corruption? For example, even if we know this guy, what's his name, the Tunisian president, Zine El Abidine of Tunisia, he was the Constitutional Rally Party. The Constitutional Rally Party was a member of the Socialist International, same as the Labour Party, UK and DAP over here, until after this president ran away. Then a few days later, the Constitutional Rally was expelled from the Socialist International. The fact of the matter is, so it does not mean that just because you are socialist tag to your name, or you say you are a social democrat, you are a hero, you can be corrupt, because you think these are good, these are wrong, but you talk about. So I mean, therefore the question comes this, is the policies, the principle of social democratic policy wrong in principle, or is it that just that the human corruption that is diverted?
See, in my presentation, I focus that there has been a transition in India's foreign policy strategy since early 90s. 1947 to 1990,
yeah, I understand. Yeah.
our framework was what you were mentioning, because particularly Jawaharlal Nehru's tenure, he was more inspired by the Soviet values, Soviet style of functioning. Rabindranath Tagore, when he visited Soviet Union in late 20s, Jawaharlal Nehru also visited Soviet Union sometime around that time. He was deeply inspired by the Soviet style of functioning, and that is why in India's constitution later on this word was incorporated that socialist society is our goal. But 1990 onwards, again a fundamental change, a transformation took place. Okay, so we are no longer in my presentation I mentioned that switched over from one kind of system to capitalist model of development. We are extensively focusing on. As far as corruption is concerned, this is a major problem and major challenge, domestic challenge before India today. But again, I am reminding this house, this August gathering, one important and interesting fact is that under the present government, not a single corruption scandal issue has come out so far. Whatever corruption scandal has taken place, that is still the tenure of the last government. I am not an advocate of Narendra Modi, as I said at the outset, because I am not a supporter of BJP. But at the same time, this is precisely a fact that during the last 2 years of present government, not a single corruption issue has come out. So, yeah.
Take first question. I'll go to President first.
Yes, sir.
Firstly, thank you very much. It's a very good presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
I got one or two questions to ask you. For example, you said the post-Cold War development, you find that I can see the trend developing between one side on China, especially Asia Pacific region, the other side on US. So you say that one side China, India is going with Russia and China. On the other side, India is doing with US, Australia.
Yes.
So I compare the two, I think the second one is more dominant, much more clearer.
Obviously.
Right? So what I find, India sees China a constant threat,
Yes.
Pakistan on the other side. And India by itself cannot be on China. China is very powerful compared to India. So India has no choice rather than join the Americans. So the Indian interest and the American interest coincide vis-a-vis China's interest. So therefore what I see that India more towards US, Japan, Australia, Vietnam,
Yes.
and the other countries. So it's quite clear, you know. So in such a situation, I think India's foreign policy is more towards on this
Tilting
line.
towards
Yeah, on this side compared
West.
to, yeah, even take South Asia, the two countries really on the side of China is Laos and Cambodia. There were no choice. But in the case of Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, they're all more or less on the side of the Americans. So you can see, so India trying to influence this region for is to take care of the nation interests. That's so I feel that if they're going to develop a balance of power alliance in the Asia Pacific region, what I see is China, North Korea, Russia, Cambodia, and Laos. I think Myanmar is a situation of now it's trending more towards the Americans.
Yes.
And
Because of the
Yeah.
recent democratic.
so I can see that thing is folding, you know. I think that thing is folding. Putting the development in the context of the South China Sea situation.
Yes.
I can see the South China Sea situation may lead to a situation whereby that a new alliance may emerge in the Asia Pacific region. And India got no choice. India has to belong to that group. That's one. And number two, I don't know whether the Indian political system is flawed or not. You see, Indian federal system is such, the central government is not strong as the state government. In Malaysia, the central government is strong compared to state government. So remember a long time ago, there was a plan in India by central government to construct, I think, a canal from north to the south to divert the water of the Ganges or something like that, so that India will not have a problem of water. But not, there's so many state government put an obstacle to it. So I think the Indian political system itself needs some kind of reformation. The third point, India got so much maritime waters, you know. The Indian Ocean side, Bay of Bengal. If I'm right, India don't have a proper maritime policy. They talked about it, you know, but I don't think they have a very well planned maritime policy to exploit the resources of the Indian waters. So basically what I feel that this thing India has to address, you know. India should have a strong central government, but I think the political system doesn't permit it. And given the capitalist system by its very nature, it will operate in such a manner that it will bring the class, the three classes, the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. Now what I see, there's a big development of middle class in India.
Yes.
But what about the person we raise, the poor in India? Okay. So this is my opinion about India, you know. So how India is going to take up interest in the vis-a-vis this development when China is a grand strategy. Not only to surround India, also in Africa, in Latin America, you know. And you say India is a global power. I don't think India is a global power.
No, I did not say.
Okay.
Aspiring.
Aspiring, okay. Okay.
Aspiring to be. Our long-term objective. The former president, he had a vision that by 2020.
Who are you referring to?
President Abdul
Kalam.
He had written a book also
Oh.
on this.
But in your opinion, do you think India will become a global power?
See, couple of observations you have made and interesting points and questions you have raised. No doubt on that point. Let me try to answer in my own way, rather than looking at from the Indian foreign policy establishments and so on and so forth. As far as Russia is concerned, it was our time-tested friend from 1947 to 1990. On a number of occasions in the United Nations Security Council, Soviet Union was the only country that stood by India time and again. Even vetoed certain decisions in favor of India. After the demise of the Soviet Union, the Russian support is gone. Now, as a result, what has happened is, neither we are very close to Russia today. At the same time, I should not say we are very close, we have become very close partner with the United States. The present government has been thinking that in the long run, that there has to be some strategic partnership with the United States and other Western powers. Last week development, very interesting, in Times of India news, that United States wants India to be a NATO ally. Okay, and I was amused to see this new development, because as you also mentioned, India, United States, Japan, Australia, taking into account of these this bloc coming up, United States would be happy to see that India becomes a NATO partner in the coming years. But again, I am very apprehensive. Why? The simple reason is that our close association with Russia is no more. At the same time, India's closer movement towards the United States and the Western world, I don't think that is paying the requisite, the kind of expectation we had. It is not paying. Why? Because Shashi Tharoor mentioned already that strategic autonomy is very important if you really want to be a global power in future. The moment we sign the civil nuclear deal, the moment we join this kind of military or strategic alliance with the United States, Japan, Australia, our strategic autonomy is further hampered, affected. So my submission would be that wait and watch policy, and my submission would be what Kanti Bajpai suggests, that first of all, let us try to resolve our boundary dispute with China so that we can concentrate, we can focus on our developmental issues. Okay, our territorial boundary with Pakistan. Now, why I am saying that India's closer association or strategic partnership with the United States is not going to be much. Why? Very recently, India's decision to grant refueling and service facility to US defense aircrafts has antagonized China further. This is a very recent development. Say hardly 2 weeks ago, the Indian Parliament has taken this decision that all US aircrafts, defense aircrafts will be given the refueling facility, and which has antagonized China. So my point is that on the one hand, we have lost Russia's support in the UN Security Council. On the other hand, we are trying to move towards the United States, and in the process, our national interest is going to be affected further. Okay, so India should have been more cautious in this matter. This is my feeling, my submission, that India should not have taken this decision very hurriedly. And then another part is maritime policy. Yes, obviously, India does not have any maritime policy. Some foreign policy experts, they even say whether India has foreign policy at all. Does India have a foreign policy? So these are the kind of debates going on. And three different viewpoints have come up. Very recently, one interesting book has come out by David Malone and Harshdeep edited India's foreign policy, Oxford Handbook on India's foreign policy. The experts from across the globe has contributed articles in their book, Oxford Handbook on India's foreign policy. In that book, three kinds of trends they are showing. That one section in the foreign policy establishment, the scholars, they feel that India really does not have concrete foreign policy framework. The other one says exactly opposite to this, that India has a very comprehensive foreign policy framework. And third one is in between, the two. So that this debate is going on. And people who say that India does not have a foreign policy because India's maritime policy is very weak. India does not have maritime policy at all. Not only that, as I said, that we have miserably failed to promote our bilateral ties, bilateral cooperation with the South Asian neighbors, which should have been our first priority. Even Sri Lanka, the development into 2012, 2013, the developments, this is that they wanted India's support to develop, to build a naval base in the Indian Ocean region. And the government of India, they thought, that time Congress government, coalition government was in power, they thought that if we cooperate with the Sri Lanka, China will be annoyed further. So we did not provide support to Sri Lanka. Next day, Chinese government offered Sri Lanka with similar facilities with more funding and huge support. Okay, so that way with Bangladesh we are maintaining somehow cordial relations because of the present government in Bangladesh. Again, if the government changes tomorrow, God knows what happens. With Pakistan, we have miserable kind of situation. With Nepal, one closest ally from 1950 to 2010, 2012, today see there is so much breach of trust between this India and Nepal. There is breach of trust between India and Bhutan. We are preaching ourselves as world's largest democracy, advocating, and in case of Nepal we are promoting and supported the monarchy. We wanted in our own interest that monarchy should prevail. That is not the strategy. How are you going to balance these two? You are preaching democracy, democratic values and supporting monarchy, and that monarchy is no longer there. As a result, you have antagonized Nepal in the process. Same thing is going to happen with Bhutan also. So my point is that yes, we are having considerable amount of debates on India's foreign policy strategy in recent years, which earlier there was hardly any scope because of one party domination, one party structure. The Congress party dominated the Indian system, and secondly because of the kind of India's association with non-alignment movement and so on, hardly there was any alternative. And today there are so many alternative strategies before India today, and we need to work on that.
Okay, I have not
I've got one more question.
Actually, I want Dr. Chandra and she also wants
Okay,
to. I'm sorry, we'll come back to you.
Yeah,
Time allows. I'll come back to you. Yes.
No, maybe because mine's just a quick extension of what you were saying about relations with Southeast Asian neighbours. Actually, I'm talking about Myanmar in particular. There are border issues with Myanmar, that it is a transit point for illicit drug trade. And I want to know, as the biggest democracy in the world, what is India's approach with new democracy unfolding in Myanmar, given also its global responsibilities? Is it weighing in on the Rohingya issue? I just want to know what you think is going
It's
to
very interesting. Very good. See, again, there is a failure on the part of India's foreign policy establishment. United States said that because of India and no other countries should support the military junta government in Myanmar. Okay, and we obeyed strictly. We should have considered the fact, taken into account this fact that is our closest neighbor. We cannot go by the US terms and conditions. And those people withdrew their embargo on Myanmar, and thereafter we changed our policy towards Myanmar, and today we have started promoting or supporting the government. Okay. So my point is, again, independent thinking in foreign policy and independent action is really a big problem before the Indian policy makers. That's why I said somewhere in my presentation that we have immense potentialities. What we need is to channelize our resources into the right direction. Time and again, what is happening is we are dictated by one or other power and we are submissive to that. I have a serious objection as a foreign policy thinker, as a foreign policy student on that particular point. And that is why I subscribe to this view of strategic autonomy as promoted by Shashi Tharoor and some other scholars. Yes.
I think she wants
Yes.
Rohingya issue.
Yes. What is that?
What is India's policy toward Rohingyas?
I mean, is it going to wait? I mean, given its strength in claiming that it's the world's biggest democracy, and there is now a new democracy unfolding across the border, where there is a very live issue of exclusion of a huge
See, but
population
in the
of people.
recent past, we had some problem with the government of Myanmar because of some border clashes and confrontation conflicts were there. But I think that is a minor thing. In the long run, we are going to sort out that problem. That is not going to be. And the present democratic government, despite the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi is not directly leading the government, but she is there. So I feel that in the coming years, things are going to change, and India's informal trade with Myanmar is substantial. And my feelings, my submission is that because of this change in the government in Myanmar, formal trade they are going to resume, as a result of which both countries will be benefited.
First, thank you very much, Professor Kothari.
Yes.
I mean, here, spending some time with us, even though we know we're on a holiday. It's very kind of you to come to our office. And I'm also sorry that we could not draw a bigger crowd.
No, it's okay.
It's partly because of the time and the situation we're in. But thank you very much, nonetheless, for your presence and your presentation. Now, I have two comments.
Yes.
The first is in response to the question that you posed, how does Malaysia, how do Malaysians look at India? I think one dimension of India's domestic politics, which will impact upon the perceptions of a very big segment of the Malaysian population, and perhaps a very big segment of the ASEAN population, as far as India is concerned, is the way you treat your minorities, the way India treats its minorities. Especially the treatment of the Muslim minority in India and the Christian minority. There have been a lot of reports in the last few years, but especially after the BJP government took over.
Yes, last 2
About,
years.
yes, last 2 years in particular, about, very unfortunate things that have happened. There are killings, marginalization, acts of discrimination, and so on. Some of it may be exaggerated, but some of these things I think are happening from what we've heard from people who are really honest and balanced about India. So that I think is going to affect perceptions as far as this part of the world is concerned. Because if you look at Southeast Asia, the biggest single religious community is Muslim in the whole of Southeast Asia. Next, we have the Buddhists. And you have the largest Muslim country in the world in this part of Indonesia. That's right, Indonesia. So I think there is this factor that one has to take into account, how India treats its minorities, especially the Now the second question or comment that I have is in relation to this point that you made, Prof, about India being seen in some circles as a NATO ally of sorts, and India's increasing military ties with not just the United States of America, but with Israel. With Israel, because if you look at the ties between India and Israel, Israel is the second biggest exporter of weapons to India. And this is something that has been growing. There is a certain perception about relations with this here. And if India gets hooked on to NATO in some relationship or other, I think this is going to be very bad for India.
Yes.
And I agree with, you mentioned Sashi Tharoor is a friend of mine, and I think what he has said is true, that it will be a strategic blunder on the part of India to get into this sort of relationship. And I see this in the larger context. Obama was in Vietnam just a few days ago. I think he has just left Vietnam. And what did he bring to the Vietnamese? Lifting the arms embargo, wanting to sell arms, right? My first reaction as a citizen of ASEAN was, this may lead to an arms race. Others would be encouraged to do the same thing. This is a very foolish thing to do. I'm not saying that, we should have a total embargo on arms and things like that. That's part of a much bigger issue. But nonetheless, I think this is something which is quite foolish. Now, just contrast that, no problem, with what the Chinese are doing in this region. Leaving aside the South China Sea, which is a separate matter. The Chinese, if you look at the way they projected themselves, not only in Asia, the world as a whole, they are interested in infrastructure development. They're pushing for infrastructure development. They're on board One Belt, One Road program. Their program vis-a-vis, BRICS, the bank that they've set up,
Yes.
the AIIB, of which India is the head, the
BRICS
bank, that's right. The other bank, actually, this is the Infrastructure Investment Bank.
The Chinese bank.
Yeah, and it is a number of countries, but India is also involved in it very heavily. Now, if you look at all these things that China is doing, China is telling people, we want to promote development. We want to promote the well-being of your people. While what the US is offering is, is arms, right? So I think there is a certain contrast. I think sooner or later this is going to impact upon people, much more than what is happening today. And it's in that context that I think one has to address this question. India has been given a role within BRICS with the consent of the other BRICS partners, especially China, which is the driving force behind BRICS. Now, India is part of a very interesting grouping that has emerged, which actually links different continents. It links Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And if you look at BRICS, its total control over global wealth will be 40%.
Yes.
Of the global wealth, the BRICS. So China is part of that. But at the same, India is part of that. But at the same time, India is the one country in BRICS that is a very ambiguous relationship. It also wants to be close to the West at the same time. The Chinese, they have a different view of how this relationship has to develop. So do you think that India has really gotten itself into a bit of a mess?
See, from beginning to end, in my submission, I tried to project the same view what you have stated. Let me clarify one by one. 2 minutes, 10 minutes time. Minority communities, the India's government has recently failed to provide adequate protection to minorities. There is no doubt on that point. The way Christians and Muslims are being targeted, it has a wider impact not only within India but across the globe. Already a couple of reactions from outside has come. So it is again another additional domestic challenge before the government of India that in the coming years India has to devise a certain comprehensive strategy to give adequate protection to the minorities, particularly these Muslims, Christians and so on and so forth. Despite the fact that we claim ourselves as a secular democratic society, these incidents are taking place, particularly during last 2 years. This is a really disturbing trend. I fully agree with you. Secondly, yes, Israel is India's very good partner in recent years, but for a long, again, US is the main factor. Why? Because for a long time, as long as India was associated closely with model and movement and so on and so forth, we kept on supporting the Palestinians side, and we kept ourselves away from Israel. But that was again a wrong policy on India's part. Okay. So the moment United States under Barack Obama started is sort of at least showing that it is trying to balance Palestine and Israel. Okay, for the first time. I'm not saying in reality, at least it is projecting that it is in favor of resolving the Palestinian crisis, so on and so forth. As at the same time, it is asking Israel that you compromise with your interest partly, so that only then India started its policy towards Israel was changed. Okay. So again, US is a main factor as far as Israel's relations with India. And again, the focus is extensively on arms and relations, arms trade and so on and so forth. So this is my setting. Third, regarding BRICS, I am keeping my fingers crossed because it is undoubtedly a very important organization. 40%, as you said, of the global population, and in terms of GDP also, it is going to be a huge. But again, you see how we are compromising with China. When this BRICS central bank decision was taken, the office is in Shanghai, the head office, and India was offered presidency, and we happily agreed to that. It should have been other way. Why did we agree? We didn't. So this is where my problem, you know. And in India's all newspaper and media channel says India has become the first president of the central bank promoted by BRICS. Is it really, Professor Hassan? Is this a really news? The bank should have been in New Delhi.
No, but the funding is coming from China.
Funding is coming.
It's the big thing.
Okay,
Money is
there was
from China.
dispute on that point also. China wanted to give more funding. Then India said that all countries should give equal funding so that everyone's stake will be same. Anyway, that is a different question. My point is that how in the coming years BRICS is going to take shape, that will decide the future course of action on India's foreign policy framework. Okay. As far as this India's tilt with the United States, already I mentioned earlier that I don't think it is a very positive or good approach on India's part to be closely associated with the United States. Some distance we must maintain so that we keep some space, some room for negotiation with China. If outright we join, as suggested by Professor, that Australia, Japan, that group, that is going to antagonize and that is going to harm our national interest further. That is my opinion.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I have a couple of points.
Please.
Maybe you can later think about it.
Yeah.
That is, you mentioned earlier that India was having a problem with China and Pakistan. And then at the end, in response to her question, you said that you are also having problem with Nepal and Sri Lanka and Bhutan. I know the situation in Bangladesh. And the kind of support that this government is receiving from India, it is creating disaster there. Here in Malaysia, hundreds of people are coming by being victim over there. They are just running away from the country. So when this government falls in Bangladesh, it will be a bigger disaster than Pakistan and China.
Yes.
So this is something, a caution I'm giving you.
No, I fully agree with you because the recent developments in Bangladesh, really very painful development. One after another, noted personality, important freedom fighters, they are being hanged and so on and so forth. And the way things are evolving in Bangladesh, and particularly you see again that this accord will miserably failed to sign for a long time. There was some water issue major with Bangladesh, between Bangladesh and India, because Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal government, being the chief minister, she objected so that this accord was not signed at that point of time. Okay, again under the present government, a new initiative has been taken and this accord is being signed. Then with Bangladesh again the exchange of those, what should I say, that land corridor, or there is some problem, what is that called? And that treaty has been signed after how many years? From 71 and today 2016. It should have been signed long before. So my point is that as far as South Asian countries are concerned, I am really deeply worried, more worried because our relations with Nepal and Bhutan, the track record shows it was absolutely normal. From 1950 to the Congress government was in power till 2014. And suddenly during last 2 years, all these new disturbance, minority issue, all these are new challenges before India. So what I mean to say is that the traditional or the previous challenges we have failed to meet, and newer challenges are before us.
Well, thank you. We are all having challenges. Thank you very much for coming to us, offering your services to deliver the talk to us. We really benefited. We really appreciate your
I must thank you.
Chandra has something to
Before end up, I must thank Professor Hassan, my close and good friend. We have met a couple of occasions in many parts of the world, and hopefully we keep meeting in future. And I thank him for giving me this opportunity to share my views and all. And I'll be happy if all of you can if we can establish contacts through email and all, so that we can exchange our ideas, and that will help us in promoting research, because couple of students working under me focusing on Southeast Asia. One student has very recently submitted thesis on India, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, India, ASEAN. Another student is focusing on similar kind of topic. So if I get feedback, I'll be very happy to get it, because somewhere, some scholar, he said that talking about a country's foreign policy is a big problem, because you cannot remain neutral. How can you be neutral? Because you have to listen to others. Only then you can frame your independent policy. And
But then how can you say that? Because Switzerland, for example, has been quite successful in maintaining a neutrality. to some
exceptional countries are in the world. You name any other country.
I know it's exceptional. It is an exceptional
Switzerland,
situation.
and that is why I plan to visit Switzerland next year.
Switzerland decided to not to become a military power.
Sir, that is exceptional.
Actually, the Americans also, when they started, they had the policies to be something like Switzerland, but they got hijacked by imperialists now they've gone the imperialist road. But originally, if you look at the ideas is also, I think, the ideal to, you might say, be friends with everybody, but do not involve other people. Don't get involved with others. Don't get into contracts and treaties, and don't take sides in people dispute. Don't interfere. And many of the, countries like Sweden, I think, also follow that policy. They're fairly neutral, I think. They don't get involved.
Well, I think we have crossed our. I'm sorry that I couldn't come back to you.
We'll be in touch.
But also, I wanted to mention to you that final exams are going on in my university.
You wrote me that I made it.
Dr. Chandra has something to
Like to
Yes, please.
This is just publications.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
During my next visit or whenever I meet Professor Hassan, I'll be happy to give my
You can meet Dr. Chandra also.
Dr. Chandra also here, because this time actually I was mentally unprepared.